The useCallback hook is the most important hook when it comes to optimizing functions in React. And in this video, I'll teach you everything that you need to know about the useCallback hook so that you can start using it in your React projects to optimize functions. So right here, I have a simple application which will help us to understand making use of the useCallback hook. And I have several things going on. The first one is this button here, which when we click, it will show or hide this particular title. So when I click, it hides. When I click, it shows. And basically, we will use this functionality right here to trigger our app to re-render. And then right here, I have another button which increases an ID of a character. So in this case, the character is a Rick and Morty character. We will be fetching those characters from this particular API here, and we will be fetching the character by ID. So this button increments the ID count, and then once it increments, we perform a refetch of the new character using the updated ID. So when I click, we get these two, and we get now character with the ID of 2, who is Morty, and when I click, we get 3, and so on. And this particular functionality of fetching the character by ID, we had done it in our previous video when we were taking a look at the useEffect hook. So if you haven't watched that video, I'll leave a link to it at the description section below, and you can learn all you need to know about the useEffect hook. So now let's check the code. You'll see that here we have account btn component, and what we are doing, we are passing a reference to this particular function here, handle character ID, and this function is incrementing the ID by 1. Okay, so we pass it like this, and this is our count btn component. We are logging this to the console to know when this particular component renders again, and we have our button here. We have the onClick event, and we are passing that particular function for increasing the ID right here. So whenever we click this button, it will basically call this particular function and it will increment the ID. Now, another interesting thing that is happening in our count btn is that we are wrapping it with this memo. And this memo is what we call a high order component. And once we wrap it like this, it prevents this count btn to re-render each time if our props does not change. Okay, so this count btn should now only render again whenever our props change. If they don't change, it should not re-render. So that is all about this particular count btn. We have another component right here called character, but we'll take a look at it later on. Okay, so let's just first comment out that one, and let me clear the console, and now I'll show you the problem that we are having. Right now, although we have wrapped this count btn with this memo, it will still re-render. So let me show you. If I click on show stroke hide, you'll see this count btn is rendered right here. If I click again, you'll see it's rendered again and again and again, even though we have wrapped it with memo to prevent the re-render. What is happening is that this handle character ID, which is a function, is changing this right here. So whenever we click show stroke hide right here, our app re-renders because the state change, and if the app re-renders, this function is created again each time. When our memo here detects that this function has changed, it also re-renders our component right here. We want to optimize this particular function so that it does not change whenever we click this particular button, because this functionality here is not related at all with our ID. To optimize this particular function, this is where we make use of the useCallback hook. So the first thing that you need to do is to just import it normally here. So you import useCallback from React, and then we will wrap this particular function with the useCallback hook. You make use of the useCallback, you invoke it. So I call it right there, and I wrap the entire of this function with that useCallback. This useCallback hook accepts two things. The first thing is a function, and as you can see, we are passing a function already. And then the second thing is an array of dependencies. This tells when useCallback should call this function again. Okay, And here, what we are depending on is only this particular set character ID function, which is coming from our use state. So we can pass that right here, set character ID. Okay. And by this, what useCallback will do, whenever our app re-renders the first time, it will create this function. But whenever it re-renders again and set character ID is not being affected, this useCallback will not call that function again, or that function will not be created again. Okay, so here, if I happen to refresh the first time, you see everything renders, even our count btn. But now, since we have wrapped this particular function right here with our useCallback, it will not be created on each re-render. So if I click on show stroke hide, you see count btn is no longer being rendered because handle character ID does not change, and this handle character ID is our function. So now that particular component here is properly optimized by making use of both the memo and the useCallback hook to optimize our handle character ID function. And if we check at our increase character ID here, you'll notice that it still increments our ID. So it works well, and it is not being affected by our show stroke hide title here. If I come down here and bring back this particular component, and I'll happen to save. Right now, whenever I click show stroke hide title, you'll see we are fetching the character, and whenever I click again, you'll notice that this is fetching the character again, and that is this use effect being called multiple times because it's calling this particular console log each time. And why does it do so? That is because our handle fetch character function, which is available at our app, this function, when our component re-renders, it is created again each time. And if it is created again, we are passing it to our character component as handle fetch, we receive it, and useEffect detects a change in this particular function, and therefore it runs the code that is in here. Okay, so whenever we click the app re-renders, useEffect detects a change in this particular function and it calls this particular code again. Therefore, it will log this to console and it will fetch the data again. So to optimize this useEffect, we need to make use of the useCallback hook at our handle fetch character function. So right here, we just need to wrap this particular function with the useCallback. So I'll just say useCallback, and then I call like that, and I cross it like that. And then we also need to pass a dependency array like that. So now when I save and let me refresh, I click on show stroke hide, you'll notice that our fetch character here is no longer being logged to the console anymore because our useEffect is not being called again because this handle fetch character is not changing on each re-render. So we have basically optimized now our useEffect right here. But now a weird thing is happening because whenever we change the ID to 2, the ID changes to 2, but you'll notice that the character did not change, meaning that the fetch did not happen. So why did fetch not happen in this case? And basically it's because we are not passing our character ID as a dependency right here to trigger a refetch of our character whenever the ID changes. So here I'll copy this ID and I'll pass it as a dependency like that. And what this ID will do, whenever we change the ID here, useCallback will detect that change. It will notice that the ID that is current is different from the previous one. Therefore, it will trigger a call to this function that we passed right here. So let me save. And now, whenever I click on increase ID, we increase the ID and we perform a refetch. And whenever we click on show stroke hide, you'll notice that we are no longer calling this fetch character multiple times, and we are no longer rendering our button multiple times, which is really cool. When do you need to use the useCallback hook? One is when you make use of a memo like this and you don't want that particular function to keep on re-rendering this particular component. Therefore, you optimize it using the useCallback hook. And the second one I showed you is when you have a useEffect and you don't want this useEffect to run on each re-render. Therefore, you optimize the function right here so that it doesn't change on each re-render. And there might be other cases whenever you just want to optimize a function in React, you can make use of the useCallback hook. Okay, so that is it for this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a thumbs up and I'll see you in the next one.